The millionaire had noticed his little girl often carried a backpack full of diapers to school but hadn't paid it any mind. Until one day, the school called with alarming news. The Mercedes sliced through the Chicago air, leaving the early morning haze and the fading skyscrapers behind. Inside, Benjamin Miller's face was flushed tense with suppressed displeasure. He pressed his lips together firmly, his thumb tapping a steady rhythm against the leather-wrapped steering wheel. The rhythmic ringing of the phone through his Bluetooth earpiece seemed to be counting down the few reserves of patience he had left. "Listen, Mark, I honestly couldn't care less what kind of coffee that magistrate is enjoying this morning. You tell him he signs the arrangement by 9 a.m., or I'll be sure to reveal every skeleton in his family's closet in court." Benjamin's voice was crisp and uncompromising. He glanced at the dashboard clock. 7:45 a.m. He was already 5 minutes behind his meticulously planned schedule. Time for Benjamin wasn't just money. It was more valuable than that. It was the only thing he felt he could truly control after that difficult day 4 years ago. In the back seat, Charlotte was nestled deep into the expansive leather upholstery. The 6-year-old seemed almost lost in the space, if not for the oversized pink backpack she was holding close to her chest. Her tiny hands gripped the straps tightly, knuckles white from the effort, as if the bag were the only shield protecting her from the vast, sometimes intimidating world outside. Charlotte leaned forward, gathering her courage to look at her father's straight back. Today was duty day, the name Charlotte gave to the only day of the month her father drove her to school himself. "Daddy," her voice was a faint whisper, barely audible over the purr of the quiet engine. "Today in class," the teacher said. Benjamin's index finger rose into the air, a clear, sharp gesture that halted her unfinished sentence. He didn't even bother to glance in the rearview mirror. "No, Mark. Stop beating around the bush. You know I can't stand unnecessary delay." He continued speaking into the headset, dismissing the existence of the child behind him from his mind. Charlotte shrunk back, leaning against the seat. She lowered her head, her gaze falling to her unevenly tied athletic shoes. She had tried to tie them herself this morning, not wanting to disturb the drowsy caregiver. Benjamin's eyes flickered past a small, laminated photograph taped to the corner of the dashboard. In the picture, a blonde woman was smiling brightly, holding an infant. That smile used to be his son. Now it was just a painful reminder of his profound loss. He quickly turned his face away, burying his focus in the gridlock ahead, as if driving furiously could help him outrun the dull ache of his grief. The car stopped abruptly outside the gates of St. Jude Preparatory School. Benjamin unlocked the master door control, his eyes glued to the blinking GPS screen, which warned of heavy congestion on the route to the district court. "We're here. Have a pleasant day. The farewell was spoken like a pre-recorded message. No warmth, no lingering affection. Charlotte fumbled with the car door. The heavy backpack pulled her slightly off balance as she stepped onto the sidewalk. She stumbled, but quickly regained her footing, still clutching her pink shield. She turned back, looking into the tinted window. She waited. 1 second, 2 seconds. Maybe Dad would roll the window down. Maybe he would wave. The engine's powerful rev was the only response. The window remained closed. The Mercedes shot away, melting into the city's stream of metallic movement, leaving Charlotte standing alone on the expansive school grounds, small and isolated. Benjamin let out a sigh of relief, tossing the earpiece onto the passenger seat. The duty was finally done. Now he could fully return to being the undefeated lawyer Miller. He steered around a corner, and the familiar emptiness washed over him. The passenger seat was bare. There was no one there to hold hands, with no one to share a complaint about the difficult magistrate. He glanced habitually into the rearview mirror. A flash of pink in the crease of the back seat caught his eye. A bow-shaped hair clip. Charlotte must have dropped it. Benjamin considered pulling over to pick it up, a subconscious act driven by his need for order. But just as he inhaled to signal the turn, a peculiar odor hit his nostrils. It wasn't the smell of expensive leather upholstery, nor was it the lavender cologne he typically wore. It was intense, acrid, a distinctive scent of cheap baby powder trying desperately to mask the smell of child waste. Benjamin frowned, stepping hard on the brake pedal. He spun around, looking at the empty back seat where the smell seemed to emanate thick and haunting, like a ghost that had just materialized. The blare of a horn from the car behind him was like a bucket of cold water, snapping Benjamin out of his daze. He pressed the accelerator, letting the car roll forward, but that strange odor clung stubbornly to his nostrils, refusing to depart. Benjamin took a deep breath, and instantly a faded, blurry memory reel played in his mind. The image of Emily, his wife, bending over the changing table, humming a wordless lullaby while cleaning their infant Charlotte. The scent of those days of heartbreaking happiness was now strangely and distortedly present in this luxury vehicle. "Nonsense," Benjamin mumbled, shaking his head sharply as if to dislodge the rush of memories. The kid must have spilled her strawberry yogurt, or worse, stepped in a dog's calling card in the neighbor's yard and wiped it on the seat. He reached for the button and lowered all 4 windows. The chilly wind from Lake Michigan rushed in, forcefully disheveling his carefully groomed hair. He needed the wind to sweep away that odor and the throbbing sensation that was starting to spread across his chest. The Mercedes slid to a stop outside the towering glass facade of Miller and Partners. Benjamin stepped out, adjusting his tie. He glanced at the suit jacket on the passenger seat, hesitated for a second, then decided to lock the car, leaving it behind. Entering the office with his usual solemn composure, Benjamin settled into his familiar leather chair, trying to bury his focus in a thick stack of merger files. The dry numbers and legal clauses were the best tranquilizers he had right now. But the fabricated calm didn't last. The desk phone rang, piercing the atmosphere of concentration. "Miller Legal," he answered, his tone maintaining its cold professionalism. "Mr. Miller, it's me, Mrs. Jenkins." The elderly caregiver's voice trembled on the other end, carrying unconcealed worry. "I apologize for troubling you at this hour, but I truly don't know what to do about Charlotte." Benjamin frowned, his pen frozen in midair. Did she get a poor mark or break another antique vase? "No, sir, it's the shopping." Mrs. Jenkins hesitated. "Yesterday afternoon, she insisted I take her to the market. She didn't want candy or toys. She demanded to buy disposable briefs, sir. A large quantity of the biggest size, along with wipes and that rash relief ointment. I told her she was too old for those things, and she burst into tears." "Disposable briefs," Benjamin repeated, irritation mounting. In his mind, the odor in the car and the caregiver's story should have clicked together to form a complete picture. It must be another one of those outlandish arts and crafts projects at St. Jude, he cut in, his voice full of weariness. Last week it was raising butterflies. This week it's probably practicing mothering skills with a giant baby doll. Private schools are always inventing ways to siphon money from parents. "But sir, she bought so many she even—" "Mrs. Jenkins." Benjamin snapped, "Just buy whatever she wants, however many she asks for. Do not call me over a few $100s for toys and disposable items. I hired you to manage these matters, not to listen to complaints." He disconnected the call abruptly before the caregiver could say another word. The long, futile dial tone hung in the air. Benjamin rubbed his throbbing temple. Children were so bothersome. They always found a way to demand attention with trivial matters. He had provided Charlotte with the best money could buy, yet it never seemed to be enough. Work swept Benjamin away in a whirlwind, consuming his entire day. By the time he drove back to his suburban mansion, the clock on his wrist read past 11 p.m. The house was swallowed in an unnerving, vast and lonely darkness. Benjamin loosened his tie and tiptoed down the wooden stairs leading to the kitchen. His throat was dry after a long day of legal arguments. He needed a cold glass of water. As he reached the bottom step, Benjamin froze. A weak yellowish light spilled out from the slightly ajar refrigerator door, cutting across the dark tile floor. A small silhouette was hunched over in the light. The sound of rustling packaging echoed clearly in the silent space, like a mouse foraging furtively for food. Benjamin narrowed his eyes, trying to discern who was in his kitchen at this hour. Benjamin held his breath, his bare feet making virtually no sound on the cold wooden floor. He moved closer, his eyes gradually adjusting to the darkness, recognizing the small figure as none other than Charlotte. In the faint yellowish glow of the refrigerator, Charlotte was working with astonishing speed. Her tiny hands were quickly gathering everything within reach. Cartons of shelf-stable milk, deep red apples, and a pile of clumsily wrapped peanut butter sandwiches in foil, all were being hastily stuffed into the corners of her worn pink backpack. Charlotte. Benjamin's voice, though not loud, resonated like a sudden explosion in the dead of night. Charlotte jumped as if electrocuted. The milk carton in her trembling hand slipped, falling to the floor with a wet thud. White milk streamed out, spreading quickly toward her feet. She spun around like a startled squirrel caught in the act, using her frail back to shield the gaping mouth of the backpack, attempting to conceal the evidence inside. Her large, round eyes were wide with intense panic, staring intently at her father. Benjamin stood still. How long had it been since he had truly looked at his daughter? A month, 2 months, or since her last birthday? Under the pale refrigerator light, he was stunned to see changes that his busyness had long obscured. The round, rosy face he remembered was now strangely gaunt. Her cheekbones were prominent, emphasizing the dark circles under her deeply set eyes, like someone who hadn't slept in a long time. The hands gripping the edge of the dining table were thin and bony, revealing faint, weak blue veins. Her Pooh Bear nightgown seemed too large for her fragile frame. "What are you doing?" Benjamin asked, his voice low, a mix of fatherly severity and the shock of someone who had just discovered something deeply wrong. His gaze swept over the pool of white milk on the floor, then settled on the bulging backpack behind her. "Why are you taking so much food at this hour?" Charlotte bowed her head, avoiding her father's scrutiny. She bit her lower lip until she almost drew blood, her chest rising and falling rapidly with each shallow breath. I'm sorry, Daddy," she whispered, her voice trembling on the verge of tears. "I didn't mean to make a mess. I'll clean it right away." "I'm not asking about the floor." Benjamin took a step closer. The faint smell of red wine from his evening engagement still clung to his clothes. "I'm asking why you need 5 cartons of milk and all those sandwiches. Are you that hungry? Didn't the cook feed you dinner?" A fleeting moment of hesitation crossed Charlotte's eyes. She clutched the backpack straps even tighter, her fingers clinging to it like a lifesaver. "No, I ate." Charlotte took a deep breath, deciding to deploy the lie she'd practiced thousands of times in her head. It's for the party tomorrow. My teacher said. She said sharing is fun. I wanted to take food to class to have a sharing party with my friends. I wanted to surprise everyone." Benjamin raised an eyebrow. "A sharing party?" "Yes, Daddy." Charlotte nodded frantically, though cold sweat was forming on the back of her neck. "The other kids bring cookies, they bring candy. I wanted to bring milk and sandwiches. My teacher said that's the healthy way." Silence enveloped the kitchen for a few seconds. Benjamin watched his daughter trying to find a flaw in the naive story. Taking food to school. Sharing with friends. Instead of the logical suspicion usually displayed by a sharp lawyer, a wave of warm, unexpected relief spread through Benjamin. He thought of Emily. His wife had been like that, always bringing baked goods to neighbors, always donating food to relief centers. "I see," Benjamin exhaled, his expression softening, replacing the initial severity with a rare, gentle smile. He convinced himself that his daughter was inheriting the best qualities of her mother. Generosity, kindness, sharing. He completely overlooked the absurdity of a 6-year-old secretly preparing a party in the middle of the night. He completely ignored Charlotte's trembling legs and her fearful, avoiding gaze. In his eyes now, it was just the endearing nervousness of a child wanting to impress her peers. "That's wonderful, Charlotte." Benjamin reached out awkwardly, patting his daughter's head. Her hair was a bit messy and smelled faintly of sweat, but he didn't notice. "Your mother would definitely be proud of you. Thinking of others is a great virtue." Charlotte froze at her father's touch. She held her breath, not daring to move, afraid that a strong exhale might dissolve this fragile moment of security. But next time, make sure the cook prepares it properly. Benjamin withdrew his hand, pointing to the pool of milk. Now clean this up and go to sleep early. You have school tomorrow. Yes, Daddy. Thank you. Charlotte whispered, her voice light as a breeze. With permission granted, she quickly grabbed paper towels and cleaned the floor, then turned to zip up the backpack. The shirk of the zipper sealed all the secrets inside. Charlotte put the backpack on her shoulders. The weight of 5 milk cartons, apples, and sandwiches pulled her tiny frame down. She had to brace herself, gritting her teeth to maintain balance. She staggered toward the stairs, walking with the wobbly gait of a brave toy soldier carrying oversized gear. Benjamin leaned against the counter, watching the small figure struggle up the wooden steps. He reached out and turned off the kitchen light, and darkness returned to envelop the house. He went back to his bedroom with a strange sense of satisfaction. The child is growing up, he thought. She's adjusting well, making friends, learning to care for others. He had worried too much. Everything was fine. His life, even without Emily, was back on track. Upstairs in the large, cold pink bedroom, Charlotte locked the door. She dropped the backpack onto the floor with a thud and let out a long sigh of relief. Her empty stomach rumbled loudly, and a wrenching hunger pain shot up her spine. On her desk, there was still half a packet of old cookies, but Charlotte didn't touch them. She opened the backpack and carefully straightened the milk cartons and smoothed the squashed slices of bread. "Don't worry," she whispered to the empty air, her hands smoothing the worn fabric of the bag as if comforting a friend. "Tomorrow, Hannah won't be hungry anymore. I promise. There will be lots of milk." She swallowed hard, trying to ignore the gnawing hunger, then climbed into bed, pulling the covers over her head, hoping sleep would come quickly to erase the emptiness in her belly. The next morning, the gray Chicago sky signaled a gloomy day. The private chauffeur's car stopped outside the St. Jude gate. Charlotte stepped out of the car. Her face was pale, devoid of color. Her dry, cracked lips were pressed tightly together. She stumbled as her feet hit the pavement, having to hold onto the car door for a moment to steady herself. "Miss, are you all right? Let me carry your bag for you." The worried old driver stepped out, moving to lift the bulging backpack from her shoulder. "No," Charlotte shrieked, recoiling. She clutched the backpack fiercely to her chest, her eyes wide with the terror of a wounded animal. "I can do it myself. Don't touch my things." The driver froze, confused, retracting his hand. Charlotte didn't wait another second. She turned her back and trudged onto the school grounds, her small figure swaying slightly in the early autumn wind. Rhythmic exercise class began at 9 a.m. The entire class gathered on the lush green lawn to warm up. Lively music played, and the other children eagerly jumped and laughed. Charlotte stood in the back row. She tried to lift her knees to the teacher's counts, 1, 2, 1, 2. Each step seemed to drain the last bit of energy from her tiny body. The world around her began to spin. The green of the grass blended with the gray of the sky. The music became distorted and distant. The gnawing hunger had turned into intense nausea. Her knees felt weak. "Charlotte, keep up," the teacher's voice called out from somewhere far away. She tried to take one more step, but her legs refused to obey. Darkness descended in the blink of an eye. The entire field screamed in alarm when Charlotte suddenly collapsed, falling onto the grass like a doll whose strings had been cut. The backpack on her shoulder flew off by inertia, rolling several times on the ground. The heavy impact forced the zipper open. From the wide-open mouth of the bag, something white, rectangular, and thick tumbled out, not just milk cartons and apples. It lay exposed on the vivid green lawn, a package of adult-sized disposable briefs, stark white, chillingly obvious. The nearby students stared, and murmurs began to rise like a swarm of angry bees, signaling an impending storm that was about to tear apart the curtain of secrecy Charlotte had used every ounce of her life force to conceal. A worn backpack, milk disappearing at night, and the naive lie of a 6-year-old. Do you believe Charlotte was really bringing food for a sharing party? Or does the instinct for a darker secret guide you don't look away? Next, the painful truth behind Charlotte's sudden fainting spell will be revealed, a truth that would make any parent's heart clench. The backpack lay exposed on the lawn, revealing its stark white secrets under the daylight, while its owner lay limp amidst the panicked shouts of her classmates. At the same time, 15 miles north of the school, Benjamin Miller was oblivious to the upheaval about to strike his world. He was standing at the head of a long, polished mahogany conference table, his hand slamming down on a thick file, causing a glass of water to slosh precariously. Clause 4.2 is a joke, isn't it? Benjamin snapped his gaze as sharp as a razor, sweeping over the dozens of bowed faces. You want me to sign this garbage and watch Miller's stock plummet tomorrow? Redo it immediately. The 45th floor conference room was dead silent. No one dared to breathe heavily. Only the faint whir of the central air conditioning could be heard. Suddenly, a violent vibration cut through the deathly stillness. All eyes turned to Benjamin's personal phone on the table. It was sliding toward the edge from the strong tremor. The screen flashed a red notification, St. Jude School, urgent. Benjamin frowned. He had an unshakable rule, no phones during meetings, but the blinking urgent line made his gut twist with a strange, unpleasant sensation. He snatched the phone, pressing it to his ear with barely contained annoyance. Miller speaking. Unless the school is on fire, you people are in serious trouble. Mr. Miller? The school nurse's breathless, trembling voice came through, sounding like an echo from somewhere terrible. Please come right away. Charlotte, she collapsed on the athletic field. The anger on Benjamin's face vanished instantly, replaced by a pallid white spreading from his neck to his forehead. Collapsed. What the devil are you talking about? She was fine this morning. Acute hypoglycemia, sir. Her blood pressure dropped very quickly. We are providing first aid, but she shows signs of prolonged exhaustion. She is so light, Mr. Miller, so light that lifting her felt like nothing. The phone nearly slipped from Benjamin's hand. Exhaustion, hypoglycemia. Charlotte. His daughter, the child who lived in luxury, ate Kobe beef and drank imported milk, was suffering from exhaustion due to hunger. I'm on my way. Benjamin threw the phone into his jacket pocket, not bothering to grab his briefcase or suit jacket. He strode directly to the door, leaving behind a bewildered conference room and $1 million contract lying abandoned. Meeting adjourned? He clipped out the sentence and vanished behind the solid oak door. The VIP elevator seemed to mock him. The floor numbers scrolled slowly. 40, 39, 38. Benjamin pounded his fist against the cold metal wall. A cold sweat started to bead on his forehead, trickling down his temple. In his mind, the image from last night surged back. Charlotte hunched over the refrigerator, the small figure shielding the backpack, the spilled milk. I'm taking it to share with my friends. A sharing party. That naive sentence now rang in his head with an entirely different resonance. It was no longer charming generosity. It was a clumsy lie, a cover-up. The smell, that bizarre odor of baby powder and waste from the other day. The fragmented pieces began to click automatically into place in the sharp mind of the top lawyer. The smell of soiled linens in the car. The massive bill for disposable briefs that the caregiver had complained about. Food vanishing every night, Charlotte's rapid weight loss, and now collapsing from hunger. A chill ran down Benjamin's spine. He realized he had been deceived. Spectacularly outmaneuvered right inside his own home by the daughter he thought was innocent and well-behaved. His concern for his daughter's health quickly shifted to another state, the bewilderment mixed with fury of a father realizing he was completely blind to his child's reality. Where was he when she was losing weight? Where was he when she had to lie to get food? Damn it! Benjamin slammed his hand on the steering wheel as the red light ahead counted down too slowly. He looked in the rearview mirror, seeing his face distorted and unfamiliar. It wasn't the cold, controlled Benjamin Miller. It was the face of a failure trying to salvage something from the ashes created by his own neglect. The Mercedes ran the red light at the last second, the tires screeching loudly on the hot asphalt as he made a sharp turn onto the road leading to St. Jude. The school gates appeared before him. Benjamin didn't slow down. He burned rubber right in front of the guard booth, leaving 2 long black skid marks on the concrete. Before the school guard could step out to inquire, Benjamin threw open the door and bolted out. His shirt was disheveled, his tie askew, his hair messy, a sight never before seen on the elegant gentleman. He slipped through the narrow pedestrian gate, running straight onto the vast school grounds. The door to the infirmary slammed open, hitting the wall with a dry thwack that startled the duty nurse, making her drop her pen. "Where is Charlotte?" Benjamin demanded, his breath-ragged sweat soaking the back of his shirt. His eyes quickly scanned the room, which reeked of disinfectant alcohol. The single cot with its crisp white sheets was empty. The young nurse nervously pointed toward the large glass window that looked out onto the playground. "Mr. Miller. She just went outside. She said she wanted some fresh air." "You let a child who just collapsed walk out alone." I tried to keep her," the nurse stammered, her voice shaking. "I made her a cup of hot milk, but she absolutely refused to drink it. She said she wasn't hungry and she wanted to wait for you on the playground. She seemed much more alert, so I—" Benjamin didn't wait for her to finish. He rushed to the window, pressing his face against the cold glass. The St. Jude playground was vast, with meticulously manicured lawns and bright, colorful play areas. Students on recess were running and playing everywhere. But among the bustling crowd, Benjamin quickly spotted his daughter's familiar small figure. Charlotte was not waiting at the gate as the nurse had said, nor was she resting on the bench under the old oak tree. She was moving, quickly. Charlotte clutched the pink backpack to her chest as if protecting a time bomb. Her gait was low and furtive, her head down, lurking behind the ornamental shrubs. Occasionally, she would stop, nervously looking around with the wary eyes of a small animal being hunted, then dart off again. Her direction was not the school entrance, but the area behind the sports equipment, shed the only neglected spot on the glamorous campus where weeds grew tall up to her knees. "Damn it," Benjamin muttered. He turned and rushed out of the infirmary, but instead of charging straight onto the field and calling her name loudly, the professional instincts of an investigative lawyer held him back. If he called, Charlotte would run. Or worse, she would deny everything just like the night before. He needed to catch her in the act. He needed to see with his own eyes what was making his daughter act like a little criminal. Benjamin took the long way around. He sneaked through the deserted corridor of the classroom wing, using the neatly trimmed box hedges as cover to conceal his presence. The sun was starting to hit its apex, casting harsh rays onto the field, but the area behind the shed was submerged in the damp shadow of the tall perimeter fence. The musty smell of old brick and the sharp scent of wild grass rose up distinctly different from the pleasant aroma of essential oils in the classrooms. Benjamin stopped hiding behind a large tree trunk, his heart pounding in his chest. About 10 yards away from him, Charlotte had also stopped in front of a pile of tattered cardboard boxes stacked into a makeshift wall. She looked left, then right again, to ensure no one was watching, then gently knocked 3 times on the cardboard wall. Tap, tap, tap. A secret signal. Benjamin narrowed his eyes. From the dark gap between the fence and the pile of old boxes, a hand reached out. The hand was so thin it was almost skeletal, blackened with dirt, and the fingernails were long and filthy. It grabbed the hem of Charlotte's clean uniform skirt and yanked hard. Charlotte showed no fear. She allowed the hand to pull her into the darkness. Benjamin held his breath. He crept closer, pressing his back against the mottled, moss-covered brick wall. The wind whistling through the gap sounded like the deep sigh of the old walls. He pressed his eye to a tiny crack between 2 cardboard boxes. The scene inside was dim, a mix of light and shadow, but it was enough to make Benjamin freeze. It was a base built from debris. A few sheets of cardboard lay on the damp ground as a makeshift carpet. Scattered around were crushed empty milk cartons, sandwich wrappers, and bits of half-eaten apples that had turned brown. 2 children were sitting opposite each other. Charlotte had put her backpack down. Facing her was a girl about the same age, maybe younger, hard to tell because of the shocking thinness of her body. The strange child wore a large, old-stained adult t-shirt, the neck sagging to reveal sharp, prominent collarbones. Her hair was tangled and matted, obscuring nearly half of her smudged face. You're late today." The stranger's voice was hoarse like sandpaper rubbing together. She trembled, hugging her knees to her chest. "I fainted," Charlotte whispered, her voice full of remorse. She quickly unzipped her backpack. "I'm sorry. Are you in much discomfort?" The other child didn't reply. She just nodded slightly, tears starting to roll down her cheeks, leaving patchy white streaks on her dirty face. She tremblingly stood up, her hands clutching the waistband of the oversized old trousers she was wearing. Benjamin frowned, not understanding what was happening. The child slowly pulled her pants down. In that moment, time seemed to stand still for Benjamin. He felt the blood in his body freeze. Inside those baggy trousers, it wasn't typical underwear. The child was wearing something bulky, yellowish, and reeking a strong, pungent odor that reached Benjamin even from several yards away. A disposable brief. But more horrifically, it was an oversaturated brief, heavy with waste, the edges tightly constricting the child's thighs, leaving angry red marks. Charlotte showed no disgust. She opened the mouth of her magic backpack wide. This time, she didn't take out books or colored pencils. She took out a package of wipes and an adult-sized disposable brief, the kind typically used for bedridden patients, clumsily cut and modified with craft scissors. "It's all right, Hannah," Charlotte said, her voice shaking but full of determination. "Let me help you. It will be over quickly. Don't cry anymore." The two children began a procedure that no 6-year-old should ever have to know, let alone perform in a dark, filthy corner like this. Charlotte, the daughter Benjamin had shielded in silk and comfort, was now kneeling on the soiled cardboard, preparing to perform the duties of a surrogate mother to a neglected child right in the heart of a civilized city. Benjamin felt his chest constrict as if someone were throttling him. The raw, cruel truth was unfolding before his eyes, tearing apart every illusion of the perfect life he had prided himself on building. Benjamin's feet felt rooted to the damp earth behind the brick wall. The cold from the wall seeped through his thin shirt, but it was nothing compared to the chill racing down his spine. Before him was a silent, tragic play, and the lead actor was his own little girl. Charlotte, with tiny hands that had never known hard labor, was trembling as she peeled off the tape of the soiled brief. Her movements were awkward and clumsy. She used the wipes to clean Hannah, but due to her deep worry and lack of experience, she rubbed too hard, causing her friend's delicate, already irritated skin to turn red. Hannah flinched, her hands gripping the edge of the cardboard, nails digging deep into the dirt. Her bluish lips were bitten so hard they almost bled just to suppress a cry of pain. She knew that if she cried loudly, the secret would be discovered, and her only lifeline would vanish. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," Charlotte whispered, her voice thin, with fear beads of sweat on her forehead, despite the cool autumn breeze whistling through the gap. It took 3 attempts to fasten the clean brief securely around her friend. It was crooked tape severely to one side, looking miserable and almost comical, but to the two children right now, it was a masterpiece of survival. As the most difficult task concluded, Charlotte hurriedly reached for the backpack. She emptied its contents. The spoils from the nighttime raid on the refrigerator tumbled onto the filthy ground. 2 cardboard milk cartons, 3 bruised red apples, and the stack of peanut butter sandwiches miserably squashed. Hannah's eyes lit up like car headlights in the dark. She lunged at the food like a small animal starved for too long. Her scrawny hand snatched a piece of bread, shoving it into her mouth and chewing desperately. The dry bread caught in her throat, making her cough violently, her face turning crimson, but she still managed to tear open a milk carton and drink a long, uninterrupted gulp. Charlotte sat cross-legged opposite her, watching in silence. Her dark-circled eyes shone with relief, as if a 1,000-pound burden had been lifted. But her body betrayed her resilient will. Her flat stomach growled loudly, a defiant sound, echoing clearly in the confined space. Hannah stopped. The half-eaten sandwich paused in her hand. She looked at Charlotte, then hesitantly broke the bread in half, extending the larger portion to her friend. "You eat," You fainted. Hannah's voice was hoarse and weak. Charlotte swallowed hard. The hunger tearing at her gut made her unconsciously clutch her stomach. She wanted to eat. She wanted to eat desperately. But the image of the bruises on Hannah's body, the sight of the soiled brief moments ago, came back blocking her primal craving. She shook her head repeatedly, pushing Hannah's hand away. No, I had breakfast at home. My daddy gives me lots to eat. You eat. Eat it all so you can grow big. Benjamin stood behind the wall, feeling as if someone had reached into his chest and crushed his heart. His daughter. The child born into comfort who had never known want. The child he had assumed only knew how to take and demand. Now she was starving herself to the point of exhaustion just to sustain a stranger. She was lying not to conceal a fault, but to carry out a sacrifice so profound that any adult should bow their head in shame. Charlotte's obedient silence all this time was not premature maturity. It was loneliness. It was a silent cry for help that he, the busy, successful father, had cruelly ignored. Where was he when she learned how to change a soiled brief? Where was he when she learned how to go hungry? The shame and remorse swelled so powerfully that Benjamin could no longer restrain himself. He could not stand by and watch this heartbreaking scene for another second. He stepped out from his hiding place. His tall figure cast a long shadow on the damp ground, enveloping the two huddled children. The sound of his leather shoe hitting the ground was a sharp, dry thump. Both children jumped as if they had been electrocuted. The milk carton in Hannah's hand dropped splattering. Charlotte whipped around, her eyes wide with terror. When she saw the familiar face looking down at her, the color drained from her face entirely. Daddy was here. Daddy saw everything. Daddy! The word choked in her throat. Primal fear took over. In Charlotte's young mind, her father was the lawyer, the representative of rules and order. And what she was doing was wrong, secret, and filthy. She let out a small, desperate cry, ignoring the remaining dizziness from her collapse. She rushed forward, spreading her small arms, wide, positioning herself directly in front of Hannah, sheltering her poor friend. The frantic plea in her voice cut straight to Benjamin's soul, completely dismantling the last fortress of pride of the iron-willed man. A 6-year-old child starving herself to feed a friend, clumsy hands attempting a diaper change in the shadows. Could you hold back tears at this sight? What will Benjamin, the powerful father, do when he witnesses his daughter shouldering the burdens of the entire adult world? Charlotte stood there, her arms spread wide, a human barrier between her father and Hannah. Her entire body trembled like a leaf in a squall. Tears streamed down her pale face, and she looked at her father with extreme fear, as if Benjamin were not her father, but a monster from the abyss come to take away her only friend. Daddy, please, Daddy, Charlotte sobbed, her voice breaking. I took the milk. I took the bread. Just punish me, Daddy. You can hit me, but don't take her away. She has nobody. Benjamin stood immobile. The autumn wind whistled through the gap in his shirt, cold but not as cold as the feeling invading his heart. His daughter was pleading with him not to punish her, as if that were the only thing he knew how to do. He said nothing. Slowly, very slowly, Benjamin lowered himself. The knee of his expensive suit trousers touched the damp, filthy ground. He knelt, shrinking his imposing frame so his eye level was equal to the two children. This unexpected action stunned Charlotte. She slowly lowered her spread arms, her eyes still wide with caution. Benjamin reached out a hand, gently pushing his daughter aside. He turned his attention to the strange child huddled behind Charlotte. Hannah squeezed her eyes shut, hands clutching her head, murmuring senseless sounds, bracing herself for a physical blow or a harsh slap. Don't be afraid, Benjamin whispered, his voice surprisingly gentle, completely, unlike his usual commanding tone in court. I won't hurt you. His large hand touched Hannah's frail arm. The child flinched but didn't run. Benjamin cautiously rolled up the sleeve of the oversized stained t-shirt. Pale, malnourished skin was revealed in the faint light. But what made Benjamin bite his lip to suppress a curse was the widespread bruising. Bruise upon bruise. Benjamin continued to move his hand down to her hip where the bulky brief was crookedly taped. The strong, acrid odor of urine rose up, hitting his nose directly. But this time, he didn't frown, he didn't turn away. His eyes were red-rimmed, glistening with unshed tears. He gently pulled down the brief's waistband slightly to examine her. The skin around her hip was fiery red. Signs of being forced to wear soiled briefs for extended periods without cleaning or changing. "Does it hurt much?" Benjamin asked, his voice choked. Hannah opened her eyes. She looked at the strange man kneeling before her. There were no whips, no shouting, only an expression of profound sorrow that she hadn't seen since her own father was escorted away by the police. "Mommy Tiffany?" Hannah burst into heart-wrenching sobs, her cries erupting after so much suppression. "Mommy said I was dirty. She didn't want to clean up. She said if I told anyone, she'd put me in the orphanage where they'd starve me to death. She's not allowed to use the toilet." Daddy Charlotte stood beside them, wiping her tears and interjecting her voice full of indignation. "She locks the bathroom door. She said it wastes water. Hannah is so hungry. Last week I saw her eating a moldy piece of bread from the school trash. I told her not to eat it, that she'd get sick. So Every single word from the two children was like a sledgehammer blow straight to Benjamin's chest, shattering his professional coldness, crushing the emotionless facade he had painstakingly built over the past 4 years. He had won hundreds of lawsuits defending justice for so many wealthy individuals, yet right here, next to his luxurious life, a savage crime against a 5-year-old was taking place, and he hadn't known. And his daughter, the 6-year-old, had been forced to fight that crime alone with stolen milk and secret briefs. Rage erupted in Benjamin, not the anger of an offended lawyer, but the fury of a human being, a father. Hot blood rushed to his face, his temple throbbing violently. He stood up abruptly, tearing off the expensive suit jacket he was wearing. Without hesitation, he wrapped it around Hannah, covering her ragged, filthy clothes. He bent down and gently scooped her into his arms. Hannah was feather-light like a small broken-winged bird. The foul smell from her body permeated his pristine white shirt, but Benjamin ignored it. "Let's go," he said definitively. He reached out his other hand and firmly took Charlotte's icy cold one. The three of them walked out of the dark hidden corner behind the shed, emerging into the light. Benjamin took long, determined strides across the school grounds. He ignored the curious pointing stares of the teachers and the privileged students on recess. He didn't care about the mud stains on the knees of his trousers. Reaching the school gate, he carefully placed Hannah in the back seat of the Mercedes, fastening her seatbelt. Charlotte climbed in next to her friend, clutching Hannah's hand tightly. Benjamin got into the driver's seat. He didn't start the engine immediately. Both his hands gripped the steering wheel, his forehead pressed hard against it. His breathing was heavy and labored. He needed a minute. A minute to calm the beast roaring in his chest, demanding to tear apart the person who inflicted those injuries. He reached for his phone, dialing a familiar number he rarely called in a personal capacity. "Chief Wilson." Benjamin's voice was cold and sharp as a scalpel. "I need your immediate assistance right now. Prepare the rapid response team and a social worker. I have evidence of severe child abuse." The voice on the other end asked for the address. Benjamin lifted his head. His eyes looked straight ahead through the windshield. No more hesitation, no more indifference, only ironclad determination remained. "Southside Housing Complex number 4, he said, pressing the gas pedal. The car shot forward, leaving the glamorous school behind. Benjamin wasn't driving home. He was driving straight into the Devil's Den to demand justice for the angels whose wings had been broken. The Southside neighborhood appeared in the bleakness of late afternoon, with its old apartment buildings showing cracked paint and a maze of laundry lines stretched like spider webs. Benjamin's shiny black Mercedes looked like a lost alien species in this massive, cluttered landscape. He slammed on the brakes, the tires crunching loudly on the gravel-covered road, stopping right in front of building number 4. Behind him, the piercing sirens of 2 police cars tore through the oppressive air. Red and blue lights streaked across the moss-covered walls, causing a few curious residents to peek out of their windows. Benjamin stepped out of the car, adjusting his shirt collar despite its recent stains. He gestured to the police chief accompanying him. "Third floor, apartment 304. We don't have much time." They quickly ascended the dark, musty-smelling staircase. Blaring, distorted rock music and shrill, erratic laughter emanated from a thin wooden door at the end of the hallway. Benjamin didn't knock. He used his fist, striking the rough wooden surface 3 distinct hard times. Bang, bang, bang. The music inside suddenly stopped. Shuffling footsteps approached. The door swung open. Tiffany Brown appeared. She wore a revealing tank top, her hair disheveled, a half-empty bottle of cheap liquor still in her hand. Her hazy, alcohol-dulled eyes narrowed as the police flashlight shone directly on her face. "What the heck?" Tiffany started to scream, but the curse caught in her throat when she realized the dark blue uniform standing rigidly before her. Especially the man standing first, Benjamin Miller, whose eyes burned with a fiery intensity that seemed to want to incinerate her on the spot. "Are you Tiffany Brown?" Benjamin asked, his voice cold and sharp, not a question, but a sentence of doom. "Who are you people? How dare you interrupt?" Benjamin didn't let her finish. He held up a file of legal documents, which contained close-up photographs of Hannah's injuries that he had asked a forensic medical examiner to take in the ambulance just 15 minutes prior. "I am Benjamin Miller, legal representative for the welfare of young Hannah Davis, and this is an emergency custody order just approved by the city court via fax." Benjamin declared clearly, every word like a nail driven into the air. "You are being placed under arrest for first-degree child maltreatment, neglect of parental responsibility, and possession of controlled substances." Tiffany froze, the liquor bottle in her hand, shattering on the floor. She looked over Benjamin's shoulder, seeing 2 police officers approaching with shining handcuffs. "No. That brat is a burden. I housed her. I gave her a place to stay." Tiffany screamed, struggling wildly as the 2 officers twisted her arms behind her back. "Let me go. She's useless. She wets the bed constantly." "Is that why you forced a 5-year-old child to wear briefs and sleep in a dog kennel?" Benjamin snapped, stepping straight into the apartment. The scene inside made his stomach churn with disgust. Garbage littered the floor. Empty liquor bottles, moldy pizza boxes were strewn everywhere. And in the darkest corner of the room, where a child should have slept, was an old rusty metal cage used for dogs. Inside were a few old newspapers and some soiled briefs that hadn't been thrown away. The fury in Benjamin's heart turned into deep revulsion. He couldn't believe a human being could treat another, a vulnerable child, like this. This wasn't a home. This was a living hell. "Take her away," Benjamin ordered, not wanting to look at her for another second. Tiffany was escorted down the stairs amidst loud, echoing curses, but no one cared. Neighbors lining the hallway watched with self-satisfied contempt. Benjamin stood in the empty room, taking a deep breath to dispel the stench. He quickly signed the temporary custody papers provided by the social worker, officially taking temporary guardianship of Hannah. He would not let her enter the foster care system, not even for one night. Returning to the Miller mansion after nightfall. The large house seemed warmer than usual today. Benjamin rolled up his sleeves and personally entered the bathroom. He gently waved the caregiver aside. "Let me do it." For the first time in years, the hands accustomed to signing million-dollar deals were awkwardly mixing warm water, testing the temperature carefully. He gently washed Hannah, cleaning away the layers of dirt and the terrible memories clinging to her frail body. He applied rash cream to her sores, as careful as if restoring a damaged, precious painting. Dinner that night was not extravagant cuisine. It was just simple hot chicken soup and buttered garlic toast. But to the 2 children, it was the most sumptuous feast of their lives. Benjamin sat at the head of the table, not eating, just watching the 2 children devour their food. Charlotte constantly put extra food on her friend's plate, grinning broadly despite her still swollen eyes. Late at night, Benjamin did not retreat to his study to check emails as usual. He sat quietly in the darkened corner of the living room, the glass of wine in his hand, having long gone cold. On the large velvet sofa, the 2 children were fast asleep. Hannah was curled up in her familiar defensive position, but her face was relaxed in peace. Beside her, Charlotte held her friend's hand tightly, their tiny fingers intertwined a sacred connection that no force could break. The silvery moonlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the beautiful scene. Benjamin looked at his daughter. He had thought he was a good father because he provided her with luxury. He had been wrong. His money hadn't taught Charlotte compassion. Her own pure heart had learned that lesson amidst the loneliness he created. She had been forced to fight evil alone while he was busy conquering meaningless heights elsewhere. He had been too arrogant, and he had almost lost the most precious thing of all. "I'm sorry," Benjamin whispered into the void, raising his glass of wine as a belated apology. The next morning as dawn broke, Benjamin was already awake. He left a note for the caregiver instructing her to look after the two girls carefully. He drove the Mercedes out of the garage, but his direction was not the Miller and Partners office building. On the passenger seat, instead of a laptop bag, was a thick legal file he had stayed up all night to study. The cover of the file clearly read, "Case of Samuel Davis, inmate number 8940. Benjamin pressed the gas. The road ahead led to the state penitentiary, where he believed he would find the last piece of the puzzle to mend these shattered lives. The dry clink of metal locks echoed in the long concrete corridor of the state penitentiary. The heavy steel door closed shut behind Benjamin, trapping him in a stifling space reeking of bleach and desperation. Benjamin sat down on the cold metal chair, bolted to the floor, facing the thick bulletproof glass separating the two worlds. He straightened his tie and placed the file on the table, trying to maintain his usual professional composure, but his fingertips were trembling slightly. The door opposite opened. Samuel Davis entered. The man in the orange prison uniform looked much older than the 35 years listed in his file, thin, gaunt, with deeply sunken eyes marked with the harsh lines of hardship. His rough, calloused hands, marked by hard labor, were clasped together, squeezed so tightly that his knuckles were white. He sat on the edge of the chair, his eyes anxiously scrutinizing the man in the expensive suit opposite him. "Are you Samuel Davis?" Benjamin asked, his voice low and steady. "Yes, sir, lawyer," Samuel replied, his voice hoarse. "The guard said someone wanted to see me about my daughter, Hannah. Is something wrong with her? Did Tiffany neglect her again?" Benjamin took a deep breath. He was used to delivering bad news to clients, but this time felt different. "I'm here to give you two pieces of news," Benjamin said slowly, observing every subtle movement on Samuel's face. "First, your ex-wife, Tiffany Brown, was arrested yesterday afternoon for first-degree child maltreatment. She will face a long custodial sentence." Samuel's eyes widened, his pupils contracting in shock. "Arrested maltreatment. What do you mean, did she strike her?" "Worse than that, Samuel. She starved her. She locked Hannah in a room, forcing her to wear soiled briefs to avoid cleaning up after her. The child is severely malnourished and suffering from serious skin infections." A terrible silence fell over the room for a few seconds. Then Samuel broke down. He slammed his fist into his chest, a painful thud echoing. Hot tears streamed out, rolling down his gaunt cheeks. "My God, Hannah, I'm so sorry." Samuel sobbed, his entire body shaking uncontrollably. "I'm a wicked fool. I believed her. I thought if I left her there, at least she'd have a roof over her head and food to eat. I pushed my child into hell." Benjamin sat still, allowing the incarcerated father to vent his pain and regret. He looked at Samuel, feeling a strange empathy creep into his heart. They were both failed fathers, each in his own way. But then Samuel abruptly lifted his head. He leaned forward, pressing his face close to the separating glass, his bloodshot eyes now burning with a fierce, specific anxiety. "Lawyer," Samuel called, his voice urgent, "where is she who is caring for her? Do you know she's terrified of thunderstorms? If it rains and no one holds her, she hides under the bed." Benjamin was stunned. "She's at my home. She's safe." "Thank God," Samuel sighed in relief, but then continued rapidly. "What about her stuffed bear, the Mr. Cuddles with the torn right ear? Did Tiffany throw it away? Hannah can't sleep without holding it. And carrots, she hates boiled carrots. She used to sneak them out in a tissue. Please tell the staff not to force her. If they puree them into soup, she'll eat it. Benjamin sat motionless in his chair. His throat felt constricted, unable to utter a word. Samuel wasn't finished. He was like a living encyclopedia of his own daughter. Oh, and one more thing, Hannah is mildly allergic to pollen. Don't keep flowers in her bedroom, please. And when braiding her hair, remember to be gentle. Her scalp is very sensitive. She used to cry every time I brushed her hair too hard. Every single word from Samuel was like a needle piercing Benjamin's heart. These small, trivial details poured out of a man who had been away from his child for 3 years, living in dark confinement, yet his memory of his daughter was as vivid and bright as yesterday. Benjamin felt a deep shame welling up. He lowered his head, avoiding Samuel's desperate gaze. His hand on the cold wooden table instinctively clenched. He asked himself, what does Charlotte like to eat? I don't know. He only knew how to sign checks for the chef to buy the most expensive ingredients. What is Charlotte afraid of? I don't know. He had never been with her during a rainstorm. What are her bedtime routines? I don't know. He always came home after she was fast asleep. A cruel and naked contrast was laid bare before him. Samuel, a poor, imprisoned man who had lost his freedom, nonetheless possessed a huge, priceless treasure trove of memories and love for his daughter. And he, Benjamin Miller, a wealthy, free, powerful man, was a poor beggar, emotionally bankrupt. He realized that Samuel might be behind bars, but his heart was always free with his child. He, despite living in a large mansion, had imprisoned himself in a cell of neglect and work. A hot, salty tear rolled down Benjamin's cheek. This was the first time he had wept since his wife's funeral 4 years ago. It was the tear of a belated awakening. "Lawyer, are you all right?" Samuel asked, bewildered, seeing the man opposite him silently bowed for too long. Benjamin took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. He lifted his head quickly, wiping away the tear with the back of his hand. His gaze at Samuel was no longer one of pity or superiority, but genuine respect. "Nothing," Benjamin said, his voice slightly shaky but firm. He slid the thick file under the small opening beneath the glass toward Samuel. "Samuel, this is a parole petition. I have thoroughly reviewed your case. Mitigating circumstances were not fully exploited, and your reform conduct has been exemplary." Samuel looked at the file, then at Benjamin, not daring to believe his ears. You intend to help me. I don't have the funds to pay legal fees." "I don't need money." Benjamin shook his head decisively. "I need you out there. Hannah needs you. And, truthfully, I need you too." "Need me?" "Yes." Benjamin offered a sad smile. "I need someone to teach me how to be a father, and I don't think anyone is better at that than you." Samuel was stunned for a moment, then a radiant smile full of hope spread across his weathered face. "Thank you, sir." "Thank you, Benjamin," Samuel said, his voice trembling with emotion. "Don't thank me yet. We have a lot of work ahead of us." Benjamin stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "I'll handle the paperwork. You just prepare yourself to tell Hannah fairy tales." Benjamin walked out of the visitation room, leaving behind the tearful hope in the eye of the incarcerated father. The prison gate opened. The blazing red light of the setting sun shone directly on Benjamin's face, dazzling but warm. His shadow stretched long and solitary on the hot brick yard. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket. The screen displayed dozens of unread emails and a packed schedule for a trip to London next week. Without hesitation, his thumb scrolled quickly across the screen. Cancel flight tickets, cancel board meeting, forward files to vice president. He powered down the phone, tucking it deep into his trousers pocket. An unprecedented sense of lightness spread through his body. He walked towards the waiting Mercedes, not as a millionaire lawyer rushing to make money, but as a father rushing home to make it in time for dinner with his daughter. His journey to learn fatherhood was just truly beginning. The Chicago autumn arrived early this year. Golden sunlight streamed through the tall French windows, bathing the large living room of the Miller mansion in a warm glow. The space, once cold and silent like a museum, was now more vibrant than ever, with bright laughter and the thump-thump of little feet on the hardwood floor. "Daddy, be gentle, you're pulling my hair out." Charlotte winced, holding her head, glaring at her father with an adorable pout. Benjamin Miller, the lawyer whose presence once terrified opponents in court, was now breaking a sweat. He sat on the edge of the sofa, back straight, his expression as tense and focused as if he were defusing a time bomb. In his hands were not legal pens for million-dollar contracts, but a wide-tooth comb and colorful hair ties. Sorry, my love." Benjamin awkwardly released the soft strand of his daughter's hair. This is more complicated than I thought. Why does it have to be divided into 3 equal parts? Can't 2 work?" Sitting cross-legged on the plush carpet below, Samuel Davis laughed heartily. The thin, gaunt man in the prison uniform from a year ago now looked completely different. He wore a crisp white shirt neatly tucked into dress trousers, radiating the healthy confidence of a man who had rediscovered his dignity. "It won't work, lawyer." Samuel shook his head, his tone teasing but patient. He reached out gently, detangling the hair of Hannah, who was sitting in his lap. "A braid has to be 3 strands. Like a tripod, it's strong and beautiful. Look, left over middle, then right over middle. Keep your hands even." Samuel's rough hands, once familiar with heavy labor, moved swiftly and gracefully over his daughter's dark hair. In an instant, a perfect, neat braid was formed. Hannah turned back, her plump, rosy cheeks rubbing against her father's shoulder affectionately. She was no longer the bone-thin, fearful, and filthy child of the past. A light yellow floral dress hugged her thriving, healthy body. Her large, round eyes sparkled with joy, free from any shadow of the past. "Your turn, Benjamin. Try again. Don't grip so tight. Feel the hair," Samuel encouraged. Benjamin took a deep breath and nodded in determination. He mimicked Samuel's movements, left over middle, right over middle. Though still clumsy, his fingers were beginning to find the rhythm. Charlotte sat perfectly still, holding her breath, awaiting her father's masterpiece. 15 minutes later. "Done," Benjamin exclaimed with pride, securing the pink elastic band at the end of his daughter's hair. Charlotte's braid looked slightly uneven, with some strands thicker than others, and a few loose baby hairs falling onto her neck. But to Benjamin, it was the greatest masterpiece he had ever created, surpassing any winning contract. Charlotte ran to the vanity mirror, turning around to admire herself. Then she rushed back, leaping into her father's arms, hugging his neck tightly. "It's beautiful, Daddy. I love it." Benjamin wrapped his arms around her small, warm body. He buried his face in the hollow of her neck, inhaling the sweet scent of strawberry shampoo, the scent of life, the scent of pristine childhood. It had completely replaced the strong odor of baby powder and sour waste that had once haunted his car a year ago. The scent of deception and pain had vanished, giving way to truth and affection. "Thank you, my girl," Benjamin whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for being patient with me. Thank you for teaching me how to love." He lifted his head, his eyes inadvertently sweeping over a corner of the living room. On the oak display shelf, holding family mementos resting humbly next to his career achievement trophies, lay the pink backpack from a year ago. It sat there, deflated, the zipper loosely undone. The fabric had been washed clean, but still showed worn patches at the corner scars from the days it had carried a burden far too heavy for its capacity. Inside, it was now empty except for a few colorful storybooks and a box of colored pencils. The 1,000-pound weight of the secret had been lifted. The backpack was now lightweight, as were the souls of the 2 children and the 2 fathers in the room. "Well, it's getting late." Samuel stood up, brushing off his trousers. "My daughter and I need to go. Hannah wants cream sauce spaghetti tonight, and I promised to be the chef." "Stay for dinner," Benjamin offered, still holding his daughter's hand. "My chef makes a wonderful version of that dish." "Thank you, but another time." Samuel smiled, his radiant grin lighting up his once sorrow-stricken face. "Today marks 1 year since I regained my freedom. I want to cook for her myself. Besides, our new apartment needs a little warmth." Benjamin nodded in understanding. He walked the father and daughter to the door. Outside, the afternoon sun was turning a shimmering honey color. Samuel walked Hannah toward the gate, holding her hand. The little girl skipped along, chattering excitedly about something that made Samuel laugh out loud. The shadows of the two figures stretched long on the cobblestone path, blending together. "Goodbye, Mr. Benjamin. Goodbye, Charlotte." Hannah waved enthusiastically. "Bye, see you at school tomorrow," Charlotte shouted back. Benjamin stood by the floor-to-ceiling window silently watching until the two figures disappeared behind the white fence. A strange sense of peace settled in his heart. He recalled the first day he met Samuel in prison. That day, he came as a savior superior bestowing a favor. But now he realized Samuel was the one who had saved him. Samuel had taught him that father wasn't a noun but a verb. It required action presence and boundless patience. "Daddy, come eat cookies. The chef just finished baking them. They're still warm." Charlotte's bright call pulled Benjamin back to reality. He turned. Charlotte was standing at the kitchen doorway, holding a plate of delicious-smelling chocolate chip cookies, her smile as bright as the morning sun. Benjamin looked at his daughter. His eyes no longer held the sharp, calculating, clock-watching expression of a busy millionaire lawyer. Instead, there was a warm, gentle gaze, utterly present. He realized that the greatest asset he had reclaimed from fate was not his winning lawsuits, but this simple, precious moment. He smiled, walking over to gently close the window, shutting out the noisy, hurried world outside. The white sheer curtain fluttered, then fell peacefully. "All right, Princess Fuzzhead," Benjamin said, stepping toward his daughter, leaving his blinking smartphone and email notifications on the coffee table. "What should we do tonight after the cookies? Continue Harry Potter Book 5, or play Monopoly?" "Read the book, Daddy. I want to know if Harry defeats the dragon." "It's a deal, but you have to promise not to secretly feed me cookie crumbs." Giggles echoed, mixing with the warm aroma of baking filling every corner of the house. In that space, there was no work, no pressure, and no painful secrets. Only love remained whole and eternal. This was not just a journey to rescue a child from abuse, but a journey of self-rescue for a father from his own neglect. Sometimes we are so consumed with earning money to build a perfect future for our children that we forget that what they need most is not inheritance, but our presence in the present. Children don't need a perfect father. They need a father who is present. Don't wait until your child's backpack is heavy with heartbreaking secrets to realize that you've missed their entire childhood. Note the story above is completely fictional. Story above is: character names, locations, and events are constructed for the purpose of artistic and educational illustration. Any resemblance to real people or actual events is purely coincidental.